Thank you. Thank you, Baltimore Book Festival, for giving me this opportunity to speak to the wonderful citizens and the readers of Baltimore. Let me start by first introducing myself. I have many identities, but I am going to only tell you about 4 of them. First off, my name is Keturah, as our host has already said. I am a traveler. I have recently returned from 5 years living abroad, 2 years in Rwanda in East Africa, and 3 years in the People's Republic of China, Shanghai specifically. I have lived on 3 different continents and have traveled to about 20 countries at this point. I'm an educator. I have successfully introduced the brilliance of Toni Morrison and the humor and wit of David Sedaris to literally about hundreds of students all around the world. And my last 2 identities are why I am here. I'm an author. I have recently published this hot new memoir, No Thanks, Black, Female, and Living in the Martyr-Free Zone. It is through writing this memoir and taking it out on tour and speaking with my readers that I have come to own my last identity, a truth teller, a truth seeker. I wrote this book because it occurred to me it is very difficult to own your truth when at the core of your truth you challenge everything that a good Black woman is supposed to want. It is difficult to even voice your truth, much less live in it, when the life you are told you should want seems to be the absolute antithesis of who you are at your core. So before I go on, I think it makes sense to start with the why. The why I penned No Thanks. I wrote this book because 20 years ago, I needed to read it. I was not aware that I needed the words within these pages, so I didn't go in search of them. There is a chance that what I have penned here has been written on numerous occasions by numerous women like me. Nevertheless, I will submit this work as documentation. Somewhere, I am certain, there is a young Black woman curled up on a couch with a man she adores. This man has offered her his sperm and his last name. She wants to be as excited about this offer as he is. She wants to tell him she does want to marry him, but just not right now, maybe in a few years when she feels ready. She hasn't said this to him because it doesn't feel like the truth. Somewhere I know there is a Black girl sitting on the floor of her studio apartment. She hasn't replied to the email from her soror urging, "Girl, send me your resume. I can get you an interview for a position it takes most people years after graduation to be considered for." See, this Black girl started her research during her final semester. A year later, she has done all the calculations, thought about the obstacles and how they can be overcome. If she teaches English abroad for about 3 to 6 years, she can pay off her student loans, travel to several parts of the world, and invest in a modest condo that she can sell off for a healthy profit if she chooses to return to the U.S. Somewhere, there is a Black millennial who has stopped going to church because she no longer wants to pretend she's a believer. She was respectful of her parents' belief the entire time she lived under their roof. She knew better than to express doubt in their God, irritation with the men who ran his church. Now that she is an adult, there is no longer a need for pretense. Each of these Black women thinks she is strange. She questions her reasoning and silences the thoughts that could mean she is insane. This is not what she should want. This is not how she should embark on Black womanhood. She will make her choices regardless. The woman in love will not marry her good Black man, nor will she birth and raise children. The college graduate will thank her soror for looking out for her before buying a one-way ticket to Thailand. The atheist will ignore her community's prayers for her soul as she lives her life completely free of any desire for salvation. But there will be this feeling, a feeling they can't shake. Something is not quite right about me. They won't understand why their decisions about their lives cause so many whispers, invite unsolicited advice, and spark concerns for their futures. And this quiet chastisement by their community will cause them to constantly question their choices. Eventually, with enough reminders that they are unicorns, they will follow orders and try to chip away at that weird horn protruding from their foreheads. It is with this book that I say to these women, sis, you ain't crazy. Neither are you alone. Now, it's the year of our Lord, 2019. I am a New York City writer. I have heard several times while I've been on book tour, I've heard when I was writing the book and explaining to friends and publishers what the book was about, is that really necessary? You don't love Jesus. There are plenty Black folk who don't love Jesus. You don't want to have children on purpose. It's the 21st century. Are you aware of the dropping birth rate? That is nothing to really write about. You kind of don't really want to be married. You want to live that single life. Have you heard of living single? Have you heard of such a thing? There really is no reason to write about this, Keturah. You can literally go to Brooklyn and pitch a brick through any bar, and you will hit 5 of you. No big deal. What has been interesting for me, though, is when I talk to readers, I've been invited to speak at several book clubs who have read the book. I am repeatedly reminded of how many people needed this truth told and how many people have had no place to take it. I love collecting stories. I love my life. I'm a Gemini. I love talking about myself. But there have been many stories from readers that I've gotten over these months that I want to share with you. First story I want to share is from a woman named Angela. Angela is the leader of the Sisters in the Storybook Club out of Chicago, out of Chi-Town. The first thing Angela said to me when I had a viral meet and greet with her book club was, I have no questions about what you wrote. I have no further comments to sort of probe you on why you wrote what you wrote. I just have to thank you. Because I'm 49 years old, and after reading your book, I finally feel normal. Angela is a woman who made a simple choice that she didn't think was a big deal. She said, I have no interest in raising children, therefore I will not have them. And Angela went about her life, not having children, enjoying her life. Angela, like many women, particularly women who wear black skin, who have chosen not to have children, has spent 49 years explaining that choice. Most recently, she was at the family cookout, minding her business, eating a potato salad, joking with the family, when all of a sudden she looked up, and all of the women in her family were around her. And they had this to offer to Angela, who at that point was only a mere young and tender 37 years old. They said to Angela, what you waiting for? Look at your cousin, look at your auntie, look at even your little niece, who now has babies. If you don't hurry up, Angela, your stuff will dry up, and you won't have a baby. Then Angela proceeded to do what every woman who has chosen not to have children does, because they want to keep the peace. They want to be invited back to the cookout. Even though they're being bullied, they smile and they chuckle. And they say stuff like, I'm so glad you guys had children. They're beautiful. I'll love up on them and bring them back to you. She kept the peace. And the Inquisition continued. They brought Big Mama over to further explain to Angela how while she had a wonderful life, she would one day regret enjoying that life so much that she did not stop to meet a man who was good enough, who would offer her a ring and a baby. I also have the story of another member of the Sisters in the Storybook Club, whose name is Angela. Angela said she wished she had my book when she was 24 years old. And she stood in the back of her church in her wedding dress, listening to the organist play Here Comes the Bride, absolutely certain she did not want to marry the lying cheater who was waiting for her at the other end of the aisle. Angela looked at all of her friends and family. She looked at the lying cheater. She considered, I already have his child. We've been together for several years. And Angela married that man. I also have the story of Keturah. As I said before, I have just returned from Shanghai, China, where I taught English at an international private school in China. And Keturah Chin was a good friend of mine who also worked with me. Born and raised in China, I think she grew up not in Shanghai, but in a neighboring province. And when I told Keturah about my book coming out and said, you should buy it, it's really good, Keturah said to me, I would buy your book, Keturah, if I read it, I'm afraid I might call off my wedding. Very awkward conversation at work, one of the most awkward conversations I've ever had. But as Keturah went on to explain, Keturah was on the cusp of 30. And if you are not aware of this, if you are a single woman in People's Republic of China, and you are close to 30, you have no prospects of a husband or baby, you are nonchalantly referred to as a single dog, a leftover woman. And I've had Chinese colleagues and friends refer to themselves in conversation as single dogs, and I've had to fix my face. It is a common practice. Relatives say it, friends say it, they don't mean any harm, it's just what you're referred to. So Keturah had been proposed to by her long-term boyfriend. She was on the cusp of 30, she was a single dog. And she kept saying to me repeatedly, it doesn't feel right. She eventually said, I don't even love him. But his parents and her parents were like, get on with this adulthood. You've been together for a while, it's time to become official adults. Eventually, Keturah did call off her wedding, and I was very proud of her, particularly given the fact that her cultural context would have made that decision even more difficult to make. One of the things she said to me when she called it off and her fiance stopped speaking to her, and so did her parents and his, was she shared with another one of our colleagues, also of Chinese heritage, that she had decided, I'm not going to do it. This is going to be the wrong choice. And the colleague said to her, I'm so glad you made the choice to end this marriage, because if you had gone on, you'd be where I am right now. Because our colleague was in an unhappy marriage. And at this point in her marriage, she saw no way out of it. Her in-laws had been moved in to help care for her young son. The young son was in an international private school where English was a spoken language of instruction, which meant school fees were anything but inexpensive, which also meant that her young son was on the track to go to high school and or a university in the West. An apartment had been bought in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Shanghai. So there was no way to undo what she too, when she was in Keturah's position, knew was a mistake. Now I tell you these stories not because I am anti-marriage. I tell you these stories not because I want you, if you are married or if you are praying for or looking for a husband who eventually you will have children with, for you to question and analyze and depict. That's way above my pay grade. You was wise, you was grown, you know your life. I present these stories to you because it has become, sadly and powerfully clear to me that all across this globe, in all my travels, women, whether they are from third world countries or whether they are from progressive ones, like this one, women across the globe are still being told and internalizing the message, you are not enough. Either you are too much of one thing or you are not enough of the other. And if you are a woman who wears black skin, don't even pretend that you are enough. My travels across the globe and talking to women specifically about their lives and their choices made me have to accept a truth that I had been lying to myself about for years. This idea of marriage and why I was not married. For the longest time, I thought that I was not married simply because I hadn't met the right man. Through meeting Keturah, through talking with Angela at the Citizen Story Book Club, and just chatting with women all around the globe, it occurred to me, I have met the right man no less than 77 times. I was an attractive black woman in Africa with an American passport. I could have been married within 15 minutes of stepping off the plane. So a truth for me that I found quiet yet big is this idea that you can be, I know the media doesn't show this, but you can be a black woman of a certain age who is single by choice, who hasn't just forgotten to get married, who hasn't thrown herself so full-heartedly into her career that nothing else matters. Love, not even going out for the book club with your girlfriends. That it can be a choice. We often position love and partnership as a journey to legal partnership. And that if you are a woman who is unmarried, you are always a lady in waiting. It occurred to me while I was on the continent of Africa that I needed to own the truth of how I really felt about marriage. And I would like to thank my slightly insane Ghanaian ex-boyfriend, George, for helping me realize that I just didn't value marriage. I have managed to fall in love twice in the years I have lived abroad. Although I have been in 2 different regions of the world for those 3 years, both of my loves have been passionate West African men. One bae had only left Africa when he moved to Asia, and the other had only traveled within the continent, venturing out past his own country only once. By West African number 2, I had become ever more clear on who I was and who I was not. Who I was, an American woman who, without a doubt, was descended from the continent of Africa. Who I was not, a woman who was interested in upholding the values of African culture that advertised itself as family-centered, but should be branded as patriarchy peddling. I remember coming to this conclusion when I narrowly escaped marriage to my Ghanaian boyfriend. We were in the early part of the relationship where there was little time for arguments because all of the sex and post-coital confessions of love took up what few hours were left after the workday. The first time we had a significant disagreement, he announced, this is a direct quote, y'all, "I do not want to discuss this anymore. You need to stop talking." When he turned away from me as if I were a petulant teen who had overstepped her bounds, I felt it my duty to disavow him of the erroneous assumption he had made about the woman he loved. He seemed uncomfortable with my ignoring his edict to shut the hell up, but remained silent as I explained to him he was dating a 40-year-old woman and not a 14-year-old child. I would not silence myself because he decided it was too much emotional work to address the conflict we were having. He listened, although grudgingly, as I continued to state my concerns about our relationship. He presented his, and we came to a resolution that I knew would only temporarily solve the problems we were having. As we kissed and made up, I allowed this thought to rest on my mind. Our love is not long for this world. This man is a damn fool. Throughout my early womanhood, I assumed my ambivalence about marriage was only because there were other things I wanted to do before I actively sought a husband. Then came Nigerian babe. Through this relationship, I came to accept that I was not just indifferent to marriage, I was disinterested in it. Falling in love with two men who adored me and who were committed to commitment even more than they were committed to me made me be more honest about what I had been claiming was a core belief. I value marriage. My years abroad have presented me with many opportunities to live up to this belief, and each time my choices have shown otherwise. Sexism aside, Ghanaian Bey was a hardworking man who made me feel protected and loved. He had shown me several times that he was capable of more open-minded ways of coupling that flouted the strict gender roles prevalent in many parts of the continent. During one of the arguments that followed our first major one, he thanked me for telling him exactly why I was angry, instead of appeasing him with silence. I could have worked on his mindset even more so over the years. I mean, he seemed a willing enough participant. But my life abroad had confirmed that I was more than enough for me. All of those quivering proclamations I had made in my 20s after having read some feministy stuff had now become solid truths. The amazing purpose-filled life I was not sure I was supposed to even want, let alone accomplish, had become a life I knew existed for me and most of the women I encountered. While love and partnership themselves did not threaten to risk the life I had built, the wrong marriage did. I stood to gain much more from keeping a bae I adored in my life than doing paperwork on a relationship that would cause me to suffer endless consequences that would come when and if my bae turned hubby made poor decisions I could not control. I didn't fantasize about building together. I felt already built, and quite solidly too. So why Keturah? Marriage rate has declined. Divorce is pretty common right now, so common that I think many divorced parents have been able to manage how to co-parent. Once you get over the eventual animosity or anger or bitterness of your marriage breaking up, then it's pretty common. Women are not getting married all the time. Women are choosing not to have children or not having children for any particular reason and making peace with it, living fabulous lives. Traveling around the world is it's so much a common thing for many people, it's not even worth mentioning. Here is why I think it is difficult for women to own their truth, particularly when that truth does not reflect what they are told the truth should reflect. Anytime a woman chooses to take a non-traditional path, representation matters. I see my story all up and down Facebook. I see my story at brunch. Where I have never seen my story are in thought pieces. I don't see my story in the movies that are targeted to me. What I see is the stories of sad women. And I grant, I hold space for women who really don't have the lives they want. They are praying every night for their Boaz. They're trying to save up to get ABF to have their baby. They love Jesus. They want to live Christian-filled lives. They want to live within 6 blocks of their mama. I hold space for that. But what I did not see, especially growing up as a child of the 80s and the 90s, what I did not see was a woman who centered herself, particularly a black woman who centered herself. What I saw a lot of were women, particularly those of us who wear black skin, suffering nobly for the greater good and being applauded for it. And as I've traveled and as I've talked to women all around the globe, I have seen that common trend. If you were not born with a penis.
If she
You are expected to listen to every other voice but your own. In matters that quite literally impact only you, you are to consider a plethora of perspectives, a plethora of impacts on everybody else, and then give them like at least a half of a vote in what you're going to do. What I have found interesting over the months this book has been out is the essay that I thought was very specific. The part of the book that I thought was very specific to a certain demographic, and that is, again, Black women who have chosen not to have children. Every single woman, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of parenting choice, has felt it strongly and has done praise works sometimes at my readings. That essay is called The S Word, the S word being selfish. Because I have, since I was 15 or 16 years old, I remember being in 6th grade and being very clear I would not be anyone's mother ever. It was clear to me the way some people who are not heterosexual say, you want me to tell you when I knew I was gay? I just always known. I've known since 6th grade. But when I started vocalizing, clearly, because I think people underestimate how often, even in these progressive times, if you are a woman, it is assumed you will one day have a child. It's just going to happen. It's assumed you want motherhood. So at a certain point, I had to start saying I'm not going to have children because people just kept assuming I would. And what was, first of all, a good silencing technique for me when I was younger was people hurled the S word at me. You're selfish. You don't want to sacrifice to raise a child. You are selfish. And I play with that word and analyze that word throughout the S word because as a 40-year-old woman now, I find the word comically absurd, particularly the reason why it's thrown at me. But when I've talked to women, particularly about why they like that essay so much, the common trend is, regardless of what your decision is, regardless if it involves your own womb, if you as a woman make a choice and say no thanks, simply because saying yes is not in your best interest, you are guilty of selfishness. So the final piece that I'm going to read before I take questions and comments is from the S word. It is specifically about being called selfish because you have chosen not to raise children, not to rear children, but it is an analysis of what that word really means and how I feel about it as a woman on the beautiful other side of 40, which I highly recommend to all of you. It's a wonderful place to be. At 40, I barely noticed the hundreds of ways in which other Black folk call me selfish for basing my reproductive decisions on my needs only. I am absolutely fascinated with the implication of the word. When someone is called selfish, it suggests that there should be some corrective behavior. There is also an implication that thinking only of self is a direct correlation to someone else being placed in a less than satisfactory position. For instance, my mother sometimes bought a family-sized box of Popeye's chicken for my siblings and me as a special treat. Once, I didn't wait until everyone else had eaten their fair share of the chicken before going back for my third drumstick. Also, I was a former fat kid from New Orleans. I love it. Wow, that's so selfish, my mother chided me. That descriptor, along with her disapproving look, was my mother's way of saying, because of your greed, one of my other children might go hungry. My mother was right. I had 3 brothers and a sister with whom I was supposed to share this greasy treat. My behavior should have been corrected because it impacted several people's lives. My selfishness could have prevented someone else in our house from having his hunger satiated. When women choose to be free of children, in contrast, what behavior is it that folk believe we should correct? We are told, but your husband might want one. How selfish of you to make such a choice without thinking about your mate. It is implied that we have put our husbands, partners who exist in real life, and even phantom men who might show up somewhere in the future, in a less than pleasing situation because we have chosen not to use our wombs to quench their baby thirst. We are asked how we can make such a decision when our parents only had one child. You mean you not gonna make your mama a grandmama? Your mama won't have any grandbabies? It is implied that we need to rethink this notion that we are not causing pain to others when making autonomous decisions about our bodies. Another ploy to correct the selfishness of child-free women is to insinuate that birthing and raising children venerates deities and memorializes ancestors. Don't you want to honor Oshu? If you want to get your grandparents back, have children. Bring children to this world. They continue the fight our ancestors could not. So apparently, our selfishness also dishonors the supernatural and steals the legacy of the dead. It is in fact my special place from whence this potential child will emerge. It is my life that will be the most changed, for better or worse. It is me who will have to make the hardest sacrifices during the early years of this potential child's life. It is me who will be risking death simply by choosing to give birth. And because I'm selfish, I want your truths. I want stories from you. We have about 15 minutes left. Any comments, questions, anyone wants to voice the truth that they have owned in their road to womanhood? Yes, ma'am.
I even catch you. I came in late. You just caught my attention. What's your name again, ma'am?
Keturah.
Keturah. Thank you so much, Keturah.
You're welcome.
I know for me, as a young black woman in her 20s who is from an East African culture, born and raised, moved here halfway through my life.
Oh, where are you from?
Uganda.
Oh,
born and
okay.
raised. Yes.
Love
so
Uganda. So
West
different.
Africans can be crazy. I get it, but
Yes.
it's okay. No.
The eastern side is a bit calmer, a bit more chill.
Sometimes. So just coming back from being in Uganda this past January, and it was just really appalling to me how many aunties, great aunts, women don't even know me, but knew that you got your degree, you have the passport, all these things. Why aren't you here to market yourself and land like the best possible man, which I could and was supposed to do apparently, and just how so many are pushing for the agenda you talk about and then some. And I think something to add of note is that class is so heavily involved in that, because for African women, doesn't matter where you are, but the higher up you go in class, it becomes even weirder and more complex, and you need to carry the legacy, you need to have a child, you need to be married, regardless of your reproductive health, which for me is an issue, regardless of what you need, what you want to study, which will be compromised if you do marry in African contexts. So many thanks for your story. I especially thank you, being an atheist woman, that is so bold in a black context.
Yeah. I'm surprised I didn't get burned alive when I was on the continent several times. Actually, I enjoyed being there, but that particularly, that combined with the not hiding anymore, that I didn't just, I told you because I had fibroids or some sad story, like it was very intentional. Yeah, there were some awkward situations in the wonderful, complex continent of Africa.
I can imagine. And so, thank you so much for your story. I look forward to reading your book. I have so many more comments and questions, and that's all I'll say.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And this is a sidebar. If you are a party person, Kampala is your city. Like I was in Rwanda, right next door to Uganda, and Rwanda is very like, it's so quiet. It's so calm. And I was like, I want to go for this life. I'm going to Kampala for the weekend. And I got to tell you, I was so damn exhausted.
Yes.
I couldn't wait to get back to Kigali. I was like, this place, I was up at 6 o'clock in the morning, like 2 or 3 nights in a row.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
You party 7 p.m. to 7 a.m.
It is literally the 24, like, city that never sleeps. You can get a soup made at 6 o'clock in the morning, buy a piece of chicken. It's just amazing. But thank you. I'm glad that you connected with the story. Thank you so much. Any other truths to share? Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I just want to say I enjoy listening to your definition of selfish.
Thank you.
You know, I've always thought that, you know, by definition, every act comes from the self, therefore selfish to some extent. It's just a matter of some acts help more people than others. But from a guy's perspective, I don't understand why women put up with a bunch of bad behavior by us guys. You know, just it's against my own self-interest, but just cut us off. You know, the mom should stop cooking. The girlfriend should just say, you know, change your act, or I'll, you know. And I think women have more power than you give yourselves credit for.
Yeah.
What's your name, sir? Neil, I agree with you, and here is the piece that I think as a man you will never see because you're a man. And again, I thought, when people move abroad, there is this story that you are magically transformed. That is a lie. The same opinions and politics and perspectives I had still exist. They're only stronger now because I started to see around the world how truly the world is created to keep women under their thumb. And part of what you don't see, sir, and this is in third world countries and progressive women like this one. There are so many women who truly, and sometimes it's very subtle, and it's the message is imparted even when people don't realize they're doing it. There are so many women who are led to believe there is absolutely nothing you can do that will hold weight to being someone's wife and being someone's mother. And I think even if you are a woman who is self-possessed, who has other goals, even if you truly want marriage and motherhood, again, I'm not trying to shame anyone who feels that is a choice for them. You is grown, you is wise, you know what's good for you. But all throughout this globe, even in the 21st century, so many women get that messaging that the reason why they don't cut men off or they make all of these compromises is because the world is so much easier if you just do as you're told. It's so much easier if you don't have to keep explaining to relatives and to random strangers that nothing is wrong with you simply because you do not have someone to call hubby and someone who calls you mom. And I think it takes a very strong-minded woman who's sure in herself to continue to center herself because there's so many parts of culture that make it hard to do so. Like I've said, I'm not trying to shade anyone's marriage, but I've taught all around the world and worked with families from all different backgrounds, socioeconomic, different parts of the world. I have yet to see these egalitarian marriages that folk be talking about. I have yet to see a mama and daddy come to a parent-teacher conference and the daddy look as exhausted as the mama. I have been in Rwanda where the mother is not just a school teacher like me. She didn't open like a little side bodega on the side of the road selling. She is running the American embassy. I sent an email to both parents. We're going to Burundi for the 8th grade trip. I'm going to need yellow cards. I'm going to need passports, all of that. Guess who responds to that email? The mother who's running the embassy. And I think there are so many parts of many cultures that really still expect and require women to do the emotional labor, especially in relationships. And unless both people, the man and the woman in that relationship, is so focused on dismantling that, they're going to keep recreating, even if the man is like you, who's saying, just cut us off. Because the fact is, you get a lot from not being cut off, right? So I respect your saying that, but I think I underestimated until I wrote this book and started getting emails and talking to women just how deep it is. But thank you for your comment. Any final comments, questions, stories to share? Yes, ma'am.
What I'm hearing is sort of like you talking about living a life of intention. so many people, who have kids, they say things like, "Oh, you're lucky you don't have kids," and I'm like, well, no, birth control exists, and and abstinence exists, and there's a lot. It's pretty easy not to have a kid actually in these days and age, unless you're in some extreme circumstance. But so I mean, so many people just kind of just drift along, and I've got a bunch of kids, and married or not, they just men and women speak about their kids that way. It just happened, and I've got all these kids, or I've got these kids by this crazy person. So they didn't choose to have kids, and they didn't choose their partner. It just kind of happened to them. So I mean, that's what I want for women and just anyone to live with intention, especially about big decisions like that, would affect someone else's life, and then, the community and everyone else. Because, if you don't want your kids and you don't, this is a thing that happened to you, you're not prepared, and I mean, that affects everyone, it affects everyone, your family members, and, we're all affected by people's choices. To, do a little planning, have some intention, and just even, I'm not originally from here, I'm from Cleveland, but I sort of noticed, growing up, going to public schools, it's sort of like the girls who didn't have any plan for what they want to be when they grow up. They're the ones who got like accidentally pregnant or something, because even if your plan isn't, you said you wanted to be a doctor, but you didn't end up doing that. Just because you had a destination in mind, you may end up somewhere else, but you'll still get further than you would have if you just had no plans at all. So, maybe you didn't become a doctor, but you got, you got your LPN, or you're a speech therapist, you did something, or, you became a teacher, you did something because you were at least moving in the direction, you had some momentum.
Exactly.
So even if your plans change, or, life happens, you still get further than if you had no intentions, no plans, no idea, no goals at all.
Exactly. And that's all I want for everybody, obviously, but as a black woman, and I'm selfish, obviously, I want it especially for black women. I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life. I'm not trying to talk you out of anything. I'm not trying to have you do some critical lens of patriarchy, feminism to the construct of marriage, motherhood. That's ridiculous. But what I do want is for more women to just think about the life that I'm told I should want. Do I really want it? I don't even want you to get too wide, because again, it ain't my business. But just to really think about, do I want it? Because particularly when you are a woman who speaks openly about not desiring marriage and not wanting to have children and sticking to your guns, your friends, when they get some brown liquor in them, they say things to you that you're just like, oh, this is Keturah times 10. And it's like, I was not expecting this. I have nothing to say to you, woo-woo. And especially when you are a writer who talks about these things openly, again, you get stories. And I kid you not, do not underestimate how many women are making huge life choices that will impact them, sometimes quite negatively, for at least a decade or so, without stopping to think, do I even want this? So if you get nothing else from No Thanks, from Keturah Kindred, just live your life with intention. I don't care what life you choose. I just want it to be life that you want. Thank you.